Have you ever had one of those days where when it begins, you know exactly who you are and what you're about, but then something happens, someone says something or does something, and all of a sudden you turn into somebody you don't even recognize, at least for a little while? For me, it might be one of those problematic parenting moments when one of my precious children goads me into an argument and I start sounding like I'm the one who's 12 years old. Or 4.5, depending on which of my children it is. Eventually, I catch myself and think, what am I doing? I have a clear policy not to negotiate with terrorists. But I get sucked in every time. But it can also happen in some of those uncomfortable conversations that we find ourselves in with someone who has very rigid religious beliefs. And I know there have been times when I'll eventually start taking things personal and maybe say some things that I wish I didn't say. And I know this happens to everyone in different ways. It can happen whether it's a coworker with an unfortunate political perspective, or a student with an attitude, if you're a teacher, or a relative with an uncompromising worldview, or some cashier in the supermarket who's having a bad day and wants to pass it on to the rest of us. Or some racist, sexist, or homophobic comment or joke that someone drops like an emotional bomb into an otherwise pleasant day. We can all get thrown off our stride and say or do things that are not really what we imagine ourselves to be in the world. Today I want to talk about how we can stay on our path, the path that we set out for ourselves, and not become derailed by other people's agendas and attitudes and neuroses. One of the stories that the children are learning in Sunday school this month is a story that comes from the Sufi tradition, the mystical Muslim tradition, and it's about a teacher and a student who are walking down the road, and the teacher is casually departing wisdom upon his student, and suddenly a carriage speeding along comes up next to them, nearly kills them, running them off the road and throwing them into a ditch. Now the teacher dusts himself off and looks over at the carriage with his hand in the air, and he says, "May all your deepest desires be fulfilled." And the student looks at his teacher like he's crazy, and he says, "How could you bless these jerks?" I think that's a translation from the Persian, the original Persian, but they nearly killed us, and they didn't even stop to see if we were okay. And the teacher replies, "Do you think that these people would go about acting like this and treating people this way if their deepest desires were fulfilled?" It's an interesting question. And it seems like a good way to look at things, especially when we're sitting here in the safety of the church. But when you've almost lost your life, or you've just been treated like dirt, it's a lot easier said than done. It's like the idea of turning the other cheek after you've been hit on one cheek. And by the way, that's the Bible story that the kids are learning and discussing this month in Sunday school. Each month our children, they learn a Bible story and also a story from one of the other world's religions and cultures that both teach a similar truth or similar wisdom about life. We're trying to give our children a broad knowledge of the wisdom literature of the world, as well as teach them the major stories and themes of the Bible. Now, this is a brief aside from my message this morning, but it's interesting to me that some people don't think that teaching the Bible is really necessary unless somebody is a Christian, because they don't really understand, it seems, that the biblical themes are central themes in Western culture and civilization, in our arts, in our literature, even in our music and poetry and politics. So beyond just the wisdom itself that one can find in the Bible, knowing the core stories and themes is pretty much essential to being fully literate and educated in Western culture, as well as being able to converse coherently with our Jewish and our Christian neighbors. So people who don't think knowing the Bible is important are usually people who've been taught the Bible in a very literal and very specific way, and they can't understand how something that is understood that way could have any relevance in people's lives. So that's not how we teach the Bible. I gave some examples a couple of weeks ago in my sermon, if you were here, when I introduced the Sermon on the Mount, and when Jesus tells this story about if you are hit on the right cheek, turn the left cheek and let them hit you there as well. Now, he was not recommending a passive approach to insults and injustice and oppression. I explained that to punch someone on the right cheek requires a left-handed punch. Well, most people don't punch with their left hand. And certainly back then, they didn't use their left hand for that. So why would Jesus say, if you're hit on that cheek? Was it only for those rare occasions when you come across a southpaw back in the ancient Middle East? No, of course not. What he was talking about was, and this is stuff that's been discovered by scholars like Walter Wink and Marcus Borg and others, is that what he was talking about was a backhanded slap with the right hand. That's how you hit somebody on the right cheek. Back in that era, it was very common. It was done by a superior to an inferior as a form of rebuke and insult. And the inferior was supposed to just take it and walk away. Jesus says, no, turn your left cheek, which means if they're going to hit you on their left cheek as well, that means they have to punch you. Actually, no, the backhanded slap doesn't work on that side. So now, the thing is, in that culture, if you punched someone, you were treating them as an equal. You didn't punch an inferior. So what he was saying was, not be passive. What he was saying was, do what you need to do to retain your own dignity and to change the situation so that you take control and you get treated the way you want to be treated, not allow that person to treat you the way they want you to be treated. And that's what I want to talk about today. How can we learn that wisdom of turning the other cheek so that we can, no matter what the situation, no matter what someone is saying or doing or trying to goad us into, we can remain true to who we are. And instead of getting sucked into their storm, we can maintain our own peace and maybe even bring them into that kind of peace. Both of these stories for this month, they teach this basic wisdom about don't let other people determine who you are. The sage, the monk who's run off the road, he's like, hey, I'm still blessing people. That's what I do. I bless people. They run me off the road. I'm not going to let them ruin my day, make me turn into somebody who's cursing and swearing. And hey, I bless people. That's what I do. And so he's blessing them even though he gets run off the road. But it's fair to ask whether these sandal-wearing sages from the past really know what it's like for us today. They didn't get cut off in traffic like we do. At least we don't think. Jesus didn't have children to contend with, at least as far as we know. Right? Jesus didn't have an ex-spouse or a mother-in-law or in-laws to deal with, at least as far as we know. Now, he did have to deal with religious extremists, though, and he was quite effective with religious extremists, unless you count the fact that he was eventually killed for it. There was that little snag in the assassination. So I think we have to weigh the wisdom and the advice of these ancient sages and ask, how can I be free to be me when I'm being baited or berated, and how can I avoid being assassinated? Let's look at a real example from our lives, from our world. Let's look at our children. Children are great at getting us sort of caught up in their world or their arguments. They are experts at reeling their parents in and manipulating us. I see some kids smiling out there right now. I took a parenting class here at the church back in the spring. It was a fantastic class, and I understand we have another one coming up starting this Wednesday that'll go for 7 weeks. So if you haven't taken a parenting class, if you're having any trouble with your kids, my wife and I just, as soon as we start having some trouble with our kids, because at different ages, different eras, things shift, we'll take a parenting class so that we can we got to brush up on this, because otherwise they're going to outnumber us and outdo us pretty soon. So we took a class this spring here at the church, and I learned some of the best one-liners from this class that have changed my home life. considerably. And I'm going to share with you some of those. The class was based on a method called love and logic. It's a really, really a wonderful parenting concept. And one of the first principles that they teach in this is that when your children start to argue with you, go brain dead. It's brilliant. It really is. Whatever you do, don't get caught up in the content of what they're saying. Because if you do, your face is likely to start turning red, and unfortunate words are going to start flowing out of your mouth, most likely. Every parent hears at some point in their life from their child, it's usually when they're trying to enforce some rule that they've set out in advance. The child's going to say, "I hate you, Mom," or "Dad." Well, does the child really hate their mom? Of course not. But that doesn't keep many parents from engaging in the content of the conversation. "No, I hope you don't really hate me, sweetheart." "Yeah, I hate you, Mom. I hate you." And it's like, now, do you need to be sent to your room now? Are you? And plus, sending them to their room, you were probably trying to get her to pick up her toys. Now you've just sent her to her room. She got out of doing what she wanted, what she was supposed to be doing, which is exactly what she was trying to do. And the thing is that my favorite one-liner, I think, from this is just two words that have changed my life, I would say. And that is when my 4.5-year-old tells me that she hates me or that I'm the worst dad in the world, I just say, "I know." That's it, conversation over. Where do you go from there? Instead of engaging a 4-year-old in a debate about my likability. Charles Fay is the professional parenting coach of this Love and Logic program. And he gets some of his best stories from those high-tech modern family interaction laboratories that have sprung up in every state and every city around the country now. You know about these family interaction laboratories, otherwise known as Walmart? Have you been to those? One of my favorites of his stories comes from the teenage clothing section at Walmart. It's a conversation that he witnessed between a mom and her 13-year-old daughter. The daughter just found an item of clothing which she will die, literally, if she does not have. She said, "Mom, I have to have this skirt. If I don't have this skirt, I will die." Yes, she will die. So it was what you should know. It was one of those cotton blend things. It's a blend of 95% air and 5% fabric. So the mom says, "Absolutely not. No." "Why not, Mom?" "Well, there's nothing there." "What's wrong with it?" "I don't feel comfortable with my daughter walking around in something like that." "Oh, all my friends have these. Why do you make me dress like a dork?" And, on and on and on. And the mom tries. She gives some, her best arguments. And they're good arguments. She says, "Honey, if your friends were on a cliff and were jumping, would you do that?" "Sweetheart, money does not grow on trees. Do you understand? And dear, you need to give thought to the image that you're portraying out in the world." And of course, Dr. Fay asked, what do you think was the result of her giving and departing all this great advice right there in the Walmart? You think she said, "This is like, Mom, I am so sorry. You are right. I need to think more about this stuff. Mom, I love you, and I'm really glad that you heightened my awareness about this." Now, has anyone ever seen this reaction to one of these? Of course not. This is a fantasy. This is a parent's fantasy. It doesn't happen. It's not real. But it's as if we parents think that if we just give the right lecture at the right time in one of these moments, in these situations, that our kids are going to see the light and say, "Oh, you are so wise. I'm so glad that you're my parent." But that doesn't happen. So what they recommend is just shut off your brain in these encounters. It's not if your kids come to you and they're hurting or they're worried, you want to show up and be empathetic and listen with your heart wide open. But when kids are just manipulating us, or, and you can feel yourself just wanting to be, to become enraged, in those moments, we need to turn the other cheek, which in this case involves going brain dead and not responding to the content of what they're saying. In other words, pull out a one-liner. These are great. When a child says, "You'd buy that for me if you loved me," then you could say, "I love you too much to argue." "That's so pathetic. I love you too much to argue." Huh. I know. All the other parents do it. I know. "You are the worst parent." I know. Over and over, as long as it takes, because the goal is you don't give them any more ammunition, because if you keep talking, all you're doing is give them fuel to continue to argue and debate with you. "I'm not the worst parent in the world." "Yes, you are. You never give me anything that I like. I've bought you many things that you like." "Oh, yeah, give me an example of, what are you doing in the middle of Walmart having this conversation?" It's going nowhere. And as far as kids are concerned, the longer, if you're still talking, they're thinking there's still a chance that they might be able to turn this whole thing around. So the point is, it's not about being passive. This is like the turning the other cheek piece. It's about taking control of the situation. Sometimes just saying, "I know," puts you back in control, and you're not giving them fuel to continue for them to stay in control, and you're waiting till you wear them down, maybe through some threats or raising your voice, which is often what ends up happening. Now, when your child says, "Well, you just don't love me. You've never loved me," you can say, "Nice try." Because you don't want to say, "I know." The point is, though, that we have to be prepared in advance, because these aren't the things that aren't just going to pop into our heads in the middle of a stressful situation. Whether it's with our kids, with our coworkers, with whoever, we need to have a vision of who we are and how we want to respond so that we can retain the control of a situation that we're in. It's like if your ex-spouse calls, if you have an ex-spouse, and starts trolling for an argument. In that case, Dr. Fay recommends, instead of using one-liners, ask questions. This is really good. You might want to write, if you have an ex-spouse or a difficult relative or a coworker, you might want to write some of these down. Because it's good for any kind of verbal, sort of someone comes and they're verbally trying to attack you, because we don't want to be goaded into lashing out and getting into a tit-for-tat kind of thing, ruining our day, raising our voices, because first of all, it's not effective. And it's usually makes the situation worse instead of better. So, but it's hard. It's hard in the face of accusations not to get hooked into the content and starting to argue. So ask questions. The person asking the questions is the person in control of the conversation. Questions like, "Tell me more. Help me understand." So if your ex-spouse or your ex-mother-in-law starts saying, "Well, you don't pay any attention to the kids, only to your new boyfriend," you know, if you start arguing in that case, that it's just you start giving ammunition. I mean, they're just trying to get you angry. You're gonna say something that they're gonna then use against you, and you're gonna incriminate yourself somehow. There's no point in trying to argue with somebody who does not have your best interest at heart about some point of fact that they're trying to, or opinion that they're trying to get you to say. So ask a question. Help me understand where you're coming from. Tell me more about this. Another good one is, what would you like to see here? Or how long have you felt this way? Fay explains that the person who's gathering the information is the person who's in control. The person asking thoughtful questions is the person who's in control. Instead of getting baited and sucked into a fight, which is going to go nowhere, make the person who's making the accusations do all the work. Make them have to come up with answers. Make them have to come up with something to say in response instead of you doing all the work. Make them stressed out and carry all the stress instead of you getting stressed out by their nonsense. So you get this. You're not being passive. You're not allowing yourself to be run over. You're actually taking control. That's what Jesus was talking about. Turn the other cheek. Take control of the situation. Be who you want to be. Show them who you are by not being goaded into becoming like them. There's an expression, choose your enemies carefully because you're going to become like them. Faye recommends that you end by saying, is there anything else you want to tell me? And then thank them. Say, I don't know how to react just now, but I appreciate you having told me. Because then you hang up the phone or you get away from the situation and you calm down and you can think rationally about, and find a time and a place and how you want to, or if you want to, respond at all. Instead of getting sucked in on their timeline into an argument. Now, it's a lot like turning the other cheek, which has never been about being passive, even though that's how it's taught in a lot of churches. It's about taking control of a situation and keeping the situation on the level you want it to be on. I know a couple who decided before they were married, they said, look, we see a lot of couples, they're bickering, they start insulting each other subtly, you see them and you hear them, and they said, we don't want that. So they made a commitment to each other before they were married and said, we're not going to do that. If one of us starts doing that, we need to call each other on it and we need to commit to stopping it. And they've really been quite effective at keeping this out of their relationship because they named it. They have a vision for their relationship. It's really helpful to have a vision for your family or a vision for your relationship, to know who do we want to be in the world, because we do get sucked off the path all the time and get pulled into being somebody we're not if we're not careful. The president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, who's out of Boston, Reverend Peter Morales, he talks a lot about what to do when we are we get into conversations about beliefs with people who have very different and especially different rigid religious beliefs. He says, instead of allowing ourselves to be reeled into an unproductive conversation about who believes what and who knows the truth about God and all these other things, he recommends that we shift the conversation to ask, what do you love and why? Because it's what we love, not what we believe, that has the potential to unite us, even across beliefs. If someone asks you, why do you believe something? You might just consider taking control of the situation, saying, I'm more interested to know, what do you love most deeply and why? Let's start there. Let's talk about that, because now you're engaging them in a significant conversation. A real conversation that opens itself up to some tenderness, some vulnerability, some caring, gets it out of the head and this abstraction into the heart, into a place where we really could connect with the person instead of ending the conversation just being divided from one another. Because what we love is a lot closer across all belief systems and denominations than what we believe about some abstract metaphysical things that nobody can prove and no one ever will be able to know for sure. So take control, move the conversation, ask the question that really makes a difference. So what do you love most deeply? Let's talk about that. Let me tell you what I love most deeply. In October, I'm gonna talk about temptations, because we don't only get thrown off our path by kids and in-laws and arguments and insults. Life also has a way of throwing other kinds of surprises at us. One of them are temptations, things that we also get pulled off our path by things that are really good, really exciting, really draw us like a magnet towards them. And we can get pulled off our path by those too. So that's going to be, I'm going to get into some of the temptation kinds of stuff in October. But life also has a way of bringing all kinds of surprises to us that we're not expecting, that throws off while we're making other plans, throws off our life. We can lose a job. We can lose a loved one. We can lose our life savings. We can lose our home suddenly, like people in Colorado from floods, or we could lose our home like so many people from fires throughout California all summer, or we could, more likely, from the wind here in Oklahoma. All kinds of unexpected events can test our resolve and can cause us to feel out of control. And the best thing that we can do is to always remember who we are and what we're about. And to have a community of people who will be with us and ride whatever storm we're going through with us at our side. To have a connection to God to draw on, a spiritual life, a spiritual practice, some kind of prayer, or something, as well as a community through which we can draw on in those times. Now, this is not abstract to me, as many of you know. When my daughter died in 2006, it was completely unexpected and out of nowhere. It almost derailed my marriage, my ministry, my family, my mind, and everything that was important to me. There's no way to prepare for those kinds of events. But having a community like All Souls saved my life. People who knew me and cared about me and visited me and baked me meals. People who came to the memorial service to cry with us and to walk with us through that valley of shadows and fears. This church has taught me that every life has a purpose, no matter how long or no matter how short. And though we cannot predict what will happen in our lives, we can make decisions about what we will do with what happens in our lives. May all your deepest desires be fulfilled. And may you have a vision of who you are and what you're about. But when things go wrong and you have no idea which way to go, remember that you are not alone and that you are surrounded by a love that's beyond belief. Amen.